Canada destroys US energy strategy, China swoops in. For decades, the United States controlled Canada's energy destiny, dictating prices and forcing 97% of Canadian oil exports through American refineries. That era is now officially over with the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, a massive infrastructure project that's just changed the entire North American energy landscape. China has swooped in with a stunning $1.5 billion mega deal through Rongxiang Petrochemical, establishing direct energy trade with Canada that bypasses the US entirely. This isn't just about business. It's a seismic shift in geopolitical power that's already sending shockwaves through Washington. What if I told you a single infrastructure project just ended decades of American energy dominance over Canada? The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion has transformed North America's energy landscape. This isn't just another pipeline, it's Canada's declaration of energy independence. For decades, Canadian oil producers had no choice but to sell to the United States at discounted prices. This cost Canada billions in potential revenue. But that story is changing dramatically now that the expanded pipeline has come online. The completion of this massive project didn't come easily. The expansion faced fierce opposition from environmental groups and some Indigenous communities, leading to years of regulatory challenges and construction delays. The Canadian government recognized what was at stake and made an unprecedented move in 2018, purchasing the pipeline from Kinder Morgan to prevent its cancellation. That multi-billion-dollar gamble is now paying off in ways that will reshape North American energy dynamics for generations. What makes this expansion so significant? It's the sheer scale. The project has nearly tripled capacity from 300,000 to 890,000 barrels per day, creating a direct superhighway from Alberta's oil sands to Canada's Pacific coast. For the first time, Canadian producers can bypass US middlemen entirely and sell directly to the highest bidders on the global market. The economic impact will be profound. Analysts predict the TMX expansion will generate $3.7 billion in wages and $9.2 billion in GDP between now and 2043. Government coffers will see an influx of $2.8 billion in tax revenue during the same period. But these numbers only tell part of the story. Perhaps most significant is how the project has created unprecedented opportunities for Indigenous communities. During construction, the project provided $4.9 billion in contracts with Indigenous businesses. It also established over $650 million in benefit agreements and $1.2 billion in skills training programs that will continue to yield dividends for generations. The expansion is already beginning to narrow the price gap between Canadian crude and global benchmarks. Industry experts suggest this spread could shrink by $3 to $4 per barrel later this year as more oil flows through the pipeline. That might not sound like much until you consider the scale. An increase of just $5 per barrel for Canadian heavy oil could inject an additional $6 billion into Canada's economy annually. This spring, history was made when the first tankers loaded with Canadian crude began sailing from British Columbia's coast, bound for Asian ports. These shipments represent more than just oil. They symbolize the end of Canada's forced dependence on American refineries. For the first time, Canadian producers have options, and that changes everything about the power dynamics between these North American neighbors. The pipeline isn't just an engineering achievement. It's a geopolitical weapon that's reshaping energy politics across the continent. With direct access to global markets, Canadian producers can now negotiate from a position of strength rather than desperation. American refineries, accustomed to purchasing Canadian crude at steep discounts, must now compete with eager buyers from across Asia. We're witnessing the birth of a new reality in North American energy relations. For generations, Canada's vast oil reserves were effectively landlocked, with the United States serving as both gatekeeper and primary beneficiary. That arrangement made sense in a different era, but the dynamics of global energy markets have evolved dramatically. The Trans Mountain expansion represents Canada's response to those changing realities. It's a bold statement that Canada is no longer content to let its resources be undervalued and its economic potential constrained by geography. By creating this direct pipeline to Pacific markets, Canada has fundamentally altered the North American energy landscape. The ripple effects will be felt far beyond the energy sector. This pipeline is rewriting Canada's global logistics playbook, creating new trade relationships and diplomatic leverage that will influence everything from international trade agreements to climate negotiations. Countries that once viewed Canada primarily through the lens of its relationship with the United States must now recognize it as an independent energy powerhouse with its own strategic objectives. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Did you know over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing? Subscribing is free and it helps us create more content you love. So go ahead and hit that button. It only takes a second. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. The first ripple from Canada's energy independence has just hit shore, and it's a tsunami with Chinese characteristics. While American politicians were busy threatening tariffs, a Chinese petrochemical company quietly signed a deal that fundamentally reshapes North America's energy landscape, proving that, in the global energy chess match, China was thinking several moves ahead. In what energy analysts are calling the most brilliant strategic play of the decade, Chinese refiner Rongxiang Petrochemical has shocked global markets by securing a massive $1.5 billion deal with Canadian energy giant Suncor. This agreement isn't just another transaction on the energy market ticker. It represents the culmination of years of patient Chinese planning to secure reliable oil sources completely outside American influence. What makes this deal particularly fascinating is the sophisticated approach Rongxiang has employed. The company utilizes flexible, free on-board contracts that provide something American refineries never offered Canadian producers: adaptability. These contracts allow Rongxiang to redirect Canadian crude shipments anywhere across Asia based on market demands and logistical advantages, creating a nimble supply chain that maximizes profit for both parties. Behind this strategic masterpiece stands Wang, an oil industry veteran whose experience runs deep in North American energy markets. Before taking the helm at Rongxiang's Canadian initiative, Wang established PetroChina's Canadian trading arm, building relationships and understanding the market from the inside out. His leadership signals China's long-term commitment to Canadian energy. This wasn't an opportunistic grab, but rather the execution of a plan years in the making. Chinese refineries have very specific reasons for their intense interest in Canadian crude. Unlike the light sweet crude that dominates most global markets, Canadian heavy sour crude perfectly matches Chinese refining capabilities. Their facilities are optimized for processing this exact type of oil, generating significantly higher profit margins compared to other crude varieties. It's a match made in petrochemical heaven. The numbers tell the story of China's growing appetite for Canadian oil. In just the first quarter of 2024, Chinese imports of Canadian crude surged by an astonishing 22%, reaching 184,000 barrels daily. Energy market analysts project this figure could double or even triple within 18 months, as more Chinese refineries secure supply contracts and the necessary tanker capacity comes online. What we're witnessing isn't just a temporary shift, but a fundamental realignment of North American energy flows. For decades, nearly all Canadian crude had a single destination, south to American refineries. Now that crude is increasingly flowing west across the Pacific, and China has positioned itself as the primary beneficiary of this historic shift. The strategic brilliance of China's approach becomes even clearer when you understand the broader context. While American energy policy has often treated Canadian resources as a guaranteed extension of domestic supply, Chinese planners recognized Canada's frustration with this arrangement. They saw the vulnerability in the US-Canada energy relationship and patiently waited for the right moment to offer Canadian producers something they desperately wanted: options. This initial agreement is just the beginning, explained one Calgary-based energy consultant who requested anonymity due to ongoing work with both Canadian and Chinese firms. Look at who else is suddenly interested in Canadian crude: Japan, South Korea, India. They're all scrambling to establish their own supply contracts now that the infrastructure exists to deliver it efficiently. This development represents a significant geopolitical setback for American energy strategy. The assumption that Canadian oil would always flow south is now demonstrably false, and the competition for these resources has suddenly become global. American refineries specifically configured to process Canadian heavy crude now face a difficult choice: pay premium prices to compete with Asian buyers, or invest billions in retrofitting facilities to handle different oil types. The implications extend well beyond the energy sector. As China deepens its economic relationship with Canada through these energy deals, other forms of trade and diplomatic cooperation will naturally follow. The $1.5 billion Rongxiang-Suncor agreement potentially represents the first building block in a much larger economic partnership between Canada and China, one that could reshape Pacific trade dynamics for decades. Perhaps most remarkable is how this shift happened largely out of public view. While media attention focused on pipeline protests and environmental concerns, China's energy strategists were quietly laying the groundwork for this moment. They recognized that eventually Canada would seek to diversify its energy markets, and they ensured China would be perfectly positioned when that day arrived. When Trump threatened a 10% tariff on Canadian oil in 2020, he unknowingly lit the fuse on America's own energy security bomb. 4 years later, that explosion is sending shockwaves through states like New York, California, and Michigan. Residents are learning the harsh lesson of taking their most reliable energy partner for granted. The US is heavily dependent on Canadian energy, importing nearly 4 million barrels of oil daily. This represents a massive portion of America's total oil imports. The relationship was supposed to be simple. Canada produces, America consumes. US refineries, particularly those along the Gulf Coast and throughout the Midwest, were specifically designed to process Canada's heavy, sour crude. It was a marriage of convenience that many assumed geography had made permanent. But as we're now seeing, convenience isn't the same as commitment. When the Trump administration threatened that 10% tariff, it wasn't seen as particularly significant in Washington, just another negotiating tactic, another way to flex America's economic muscle. But in Ottawa, it was nothing short of a wake-up call. Canadian officials, who had watched 97% of their energy exports flow to a single market, suddenly realized the vulnerability of their position. Canada's response was swift and strategic. The government launched a $6.5 billion support plan to help exporters tap into global markets, with $5 billion allocated specifically for global market access and another $1 billion for agriculture. This wasn't just a policy adjustment, it was the beginning of a fundamental realignment of Canadian energy strategy. Now we're seeing the consequences play out in real time. US refineries are finding themselves in an increasingly uncomfortable position. These facilities, with their billions invested in equipment specifically calibrated to process Canadian heavy crude, face an impossible choice: pay premium prices to compete with eager Asian buyers or undertake costly retrofits to process different types of oil. Either option means one thing for American consumers: higher prices at the pump. The pain is already being felt across multiple states. In regions heavily dependent on Canadian imports, the early signs of supply constraints are emerging. Price spikes that industry insiders attribute directly to the redirection of Canadian resources are becoming more common. And this is just the beginning. What's coming next will make today's challenges look minor by comparison. The LNG Canada mega project in Kitimat, British Columbia, represents another significant redirection of energy resources. When it comes online in late 2025, this massive facility, backed by a consortium including Shell and PetroChina, will begin shipping liquefied natural gas directly to Asian markets. This matters because almost all of Canada's natural gas exports have historically gone to the United States. The Kitimat facility changes that equation dramatically, giving Canadian producers yet another option beyond the American market. For US consumers, particularly in northern states that rely on Canadian natural gas for heating during brutal winters, the timing couldn't be worse. The irony is that American energy planners had years to see this coming. Canada's frustration with being treated as little more than an energy colony was growing long before Trump's tariff threat. The persistent discount forced on Canadian crude, often $15 to $25 below market rates, created billions in motivation for Canada to find alternative buyers. What we're witnessing is the collision of American hubris with Canadian pragmatism. US policymakers assumed their dominant position was unassailable, that Canada had no choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. Meanwhile, Canadian officials were quietly building relationships with Asian partners, laying the groundwork for precisely the pivot we're now seeing. The situation becomes even more complicated when you look at the specialized nature of America's refining infrastructure. Many US facilities were custom-built to handle the specific characteristics of Canadian heavy crude. Retrofitting these plants to process different oil types isn't just expensive. It's a multi-year undertaking that would cause significant supply disruptions during the transition. The sectors hit hardest will be manufacturing and transportation, where energy costs make up a significant portion of operational expenses. When factories in Michigan and New York face higher energy bills, those costs inevitably get passed along to consumers. The same goes for trucking companies hauling goods across the country. What we're witnessing isn't just a change in where oil flows, it's a complete global realignment of Canada's energy strategy. This pivot away from US dependence represents a fundamental shift in the global energy map with profound implications for North American relations. While the exact timeline remains unclear, one thing is certain. Canada's diversification beyond American markets is accelerating faster than anyone anticipated. Asia, with China leading the charge, stands to gain a more reliable energy partner, while the United States may soon face higher prices for the Canadian crude they've long taken for granted. The new North American energy order is here, and it's multipolar. Thanks for watching. What do you think about Canada breaking away from US energy dependence and forming direct deals with China? Is this a smart move toward true energy independence, or could it backfire by triggering long-term geopolitical consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to give it a like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a major update on stories that shape our world. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.